Hi, everyone. It's so good to have you all here again, and welcome to this live webinar. We're now in the fourth module of the course, and it's hard to believe that we're already more than halfway through this journey. But I really hope that you're all learning a lot and being inspired by the guest experts and also from your fellow learners, given that you're all bringing in such diverse perspectives and experiences from work and personal life as well. And I think that has really enriched the course for all of us. Now, I know that some of you have joined us along the way and may not have caught up with everything yet. So, just by way of a quick recap on what we've already learned on the course so far, while we just give it a couple more minutes for others to join. So, Module 1 started by answering the question, why social innovation and entrepreneurship? And this laid the foundation of what social entrepreneurship is and how it's connected to global transformations in business and industry. And then module two looked at social entrepreneurship and the corporate world. And then module three introduced us to systems change and the various levels of impact. Module four, which we've been exploring this week, is all about developing change maker skills to advance social impact. And our guest expert today is Chris Kasabach. Now, over the last 25 years, Chris has developed thought-leading nonprofits, for-profits, and international projects in community development, education, connected healthcare, wearable computing, and the arts. His work has been featured in the Smithsonian Design Museum and received two Gold International Design Excellence Awards. Chris has led courses at the undergraduate and graduate levels in Carnegie Mellon's School of Design and Engineering, and he's been an invited speaker, moderator, or panelist at various summits and conferences across the world. At Watson Foundation, Chris is responsible for the strategy, for team, and for programs, and he deeply values his time supporting students as they cross disciplines and borders to develop their best selves. Chris, welcome to the Future of Business course.
Thank you, Sharon. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, before we jump into it, I just wanted to remind those that are watching live to click on the survey button just below the screen to indicate to us that you're watching live so that you can get your extra points for that. Okay, so Chris, could you tell us briefly about your professional journey and, of course, about your current role leading the Watson Foundation?
Sure. Well, my background is in building research organizations, companies, and nonprofits. I'm the executive director of Watson, as you shared. We're an international foundation based in New York City, and we support emerging adults, college years through early career, to expand their vision and develop their potential in any discipline. It could be medicine, law, business, design, policy, or combinations that have never existed. It's very entrepreneurial, and that's why I'm excited to be here with you. It's entrepreneurial in that we encourage young leaders to look closely at their strengths, their interests, and their values, and then help them develop pathways that match. This can be in the form of an internship at an organization, an introduction. It may be helping them start an initiative in their own organization or create a new one. My background is in integrated product development and strategic leadership, and I've been with Watson now for 14 years, but it has not been a straight path, and I imagine it hasn't for some of those on the Zoom today. So my background started out wanting to be a designer and a builder and a maker. And as I was graduating with a product design degree, I found this remarkable book called Design for the Real World, all about product design. But the very first few pages, the very first sentence said, there are a few professions worse than product design, but not many. And it was this terrifying crisis and calling for me. What could they possibly mean by that? And it meant that a lot of times product design is in service to consumption, to feed our desires, to get us to buy and buy again. And it became a real calling for how I could bring the social parts of me to the creative parts of design. And I feel like I've been doing that for most of my life and now help others do the same. For much of my professional life now, I help others bridge who they are with who they might become, to not see their interests that sometimes appear unmatched in the workforce and see how those interests can be a source of unique value inside or outside their organization.
Wow. I love that sentence that you just said about bridging people from who they are to who they could be. I mean, I think that just summarizes the work that you do so well. And I understand that there's a new program that you're working on. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. So for the last 3 years, we've been on a listening tour called a leadership initiative, working with businesses, educators, and the social sector internationally to understand what gets in the way of young leaders developing their potential. In other words, once they identify an area of deep interest and value, what prevents them from pursuing it for their benefit, for all of ours? And what we've come to, and I think this is directly related to entrepreneurship, is that there are three things that prevent that from happening. And it's skills, environments, and relationships. These are the same three ingredients as I shared for entrepreneurship in an organization. The skills, what we learned is we just don't learn most of the skills needed to be an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. They are not native, if you will, to most majors or disciplinary learning. This includes things like relationship management, business acumen, leadership skills, which is a very defined set of skills, complex and deep problem solving that gets at the root cause of issues, collaboration skills with colleagues, environments were also missing in most of the environments that we were working and talking. You really need a culture and a community that fosters ideas and growth. One of the learnings is that people tend to bring about 50% of themselves to work. That's the part that fills the job description and that they're really good at in their immediate work. But that other 50%, the ways that a team member may want to grow, the ideas they have from their unique view into the work, that often doesn't get developed. And why does that go to waste? Encouraging
Mm,
someone to bring their whole self is good for innovation. It's good for intellectual property development, the business, retention, culture, and development of good citizens. And then
mhm,
the third, relationships. A lot of folks just don't have the support of others, simply. And it's very hard to go it alone, especially as Ashoka knows better than anybody, when you're trying to do big, important change. You need partners. I often say that partners double the enjoyment and they have the hardship because you have a sounding board, you have a colleague, you have somebody to go through the trials with. So I can share more about that and the kind of relationships as we go along.
okay, fantastic. So when we speak about entrepreneurs, and we have a lot of emerging entrepreneurs who are watching us live on this course, and you speak about leadership, and I think a lot of entrepreneurship does involve leadership, right, within the organization. So what role do you think entrepreneurs play in bringing social innovation within their communities and their companies?
They're hugely important. They are catalysts, they're problem finders, not just problem solvers. They're surfacing the issues. And I think they're so important because they're in a unique position in the organization. And that unique position is somewhere that nobody else can see what they see. And so they're going to necessarily bring unique insights that you wouldn't if you're operating at a different level of the organization. On the leadership front, I'm glad that you brought it up, Sharon, because it might be really hard to cultivate a new idea. And I'm the first to admit it. It could be terribly scary. What if your idea doesn't land? And you probably don't have the formal authority to do it unless your culture has been set up for it. But you do have informal authority. And that informal authority comes in the form of being a subject matter expert in your area. And that's a great place to start.
Mm, mm. You mentioned something quite interesting, Chris, about the fact that it's difficult unless your culture has been set up for it. And I think that's a great segue into my next question, which is going to be focusing on culture, because we have represented in this group of learners different organizations and companies that are really interested in shifting the power and culture dynamics in a way that really makes space for social entrepreneurs and for innovation. So, what are your thoughts on how this can be achieved? How do they go about shifting that culture?
It's a great question. And it was at the heart of that 3-year research program that we're just completing now. And we're excited that Ashoka is joining us. It really comes down to skills, environments, and relationships. You need a culture that values this kind of change making and entrepreneurship. The skills, again, they're not intrinsic to any one discipline. And so they're often not taught or cultivated or encouraged. So that has to happen. That can happen at the top and be transmitted through the organizations. That's the best case. But it can also be cultivated bottom up or from wherever you are within the organization. It could take the form of informal or formal professional development, certifications, forming a community of practice. A community of
Mm,
practice is like-minded individuals in your discipline. They may not be in your organization, they might be in parallel organizations, but they share similar workflows. For example, if you're in operations and you do a lot of supply chain, there's other people who are going through those challenges too, and forming a community of practice with them is a great way of doubling the enjoyment and having the hardship that I was talking about. Then in the environments, you really need to have an environment where you can bring ideas forward. Often leaders, the formal leaders or formal authority is concerned about folks coming up with ideas that won't be directly relevant, not getting the original work done, not hitting the KPIs of the organization. And our research shows that set up with the right holding environment, that's not the case. It's not the case that work drifts. Work focuses and it gets better. And then
mm,
relationships. You really need to, and I like to start at just the smallest, most basic level and not talk about this as an abstract idea. Start small and start with confidants. Because
mhm,
again, it can really be scary just jumping in and trying to start a new idea. I can give you an explanation of this. A confidant is somebody who's you can share private thoughts with, your feelings, your worries, these nascent entrepreneurial plans, and they'll protect your confidence. That's the relationship. And
mm,
they may even be outside of your organization and likely not invested in the outcome. And it's a safe place to just share ideas because they'll give you some thoughts, but more importantly, you'll hear yourself process these ideas and reflect on them. And then work your
mm,
way from confidants to allies. An ally is a really different kind of person. It's somebody who's going to actively support you, your interest, and your goals in this initiative. And they'll support you, especially when it requires effort or risk and they're uniquely set up to do it. They're going to help advance and they're going to help defend your position. And so that's a
mm,
very specific kind of person that you're looking for and a kind of developmental process that you can think about. It's interesting talking about this because we're living this as well. After this 3-year listening tour, we're now developing a new organization that'll provide all three of these things, the skills, the environments, and the relationships to young people anywhere in the world. And again, we're happy to be working with Ashoka as a partner in delivering it.
mm. Wow. Thanks, Chris. So I want to come back to what you said about, creating a safe space and especially on the community of practice piece. Because I think that that's a very practical and tangible takeaway that some of our learners can actually implement. But I'm actually just curious about this listening tour and the fact that it took 3 years. Was that the original plan, or because it feels like 3 years is a long time, right?
Right, it
And
does. It's a
there's a
good
lot of
point.
patience. Yeah, so
Yes.
I'm just wondering how
Well,
you.
it's
Mhm,
interesting because it's an example of entrepreneurship inside Watson. So
mhm,
we wanted to understand what is preventing students from going after their biggest ideas, whether those ideas are in their neighborhood or whether they're international organizations. And when we really looked at what would it take for us to build a legitimate case for what we find and for us to really be able to create something of value following this work, that we needed to get out there and talk to people. And so we co-created this entrepreneurial activity by having listening tours. We're not coming to fix anything. We're not coming to impose anything. We just wanted to find other like-minded leaders who had the same interest. And so we started small. Again, it was a prototype. We had a listening tour in New York where our office is. We invited others who had the same concerns in business, in education, and in the social sector. And we just talked and we co-facilitated as well. We'd be 2 hours into the conversation and say, this really isn't what I signed up for, or somebody might say, or where are we going to get when we're done with this conversation? And then somebody else would chime in and say, this is really important. I don't have anywhere else where I can talk about this stuff. And it would redirect the room. And over the course of 3 years, we traveled literally around the world, starting in New York and visiting organizations who wanted to join us. Importantly, it took a long time because we cultivated the folks we talked to from those who were coming. It wasn't our idea who should show up to these conversations. It was all the folks in the room who were saying who knew of others who had networks of their own who had the same concerns. So it was a very patient process because we wanted to make sure we did it right and that we never got in front of the trust that we were building. And it's been a remarkable process. It really has. And again, working with so many of your colleagues at Ashoka now with it.
That's really impressive. And it actually reminds me of a comment that I've seen on our platform from one of the learners. I can't remember which organization she's from, but as we're learning about systems change and the various levels of impact and how you go about identifying problems in the community, she also spoke about stakeholder meetings that they've started having. I think it's in Italy, actually. Um, in a sector where there is a lot of exclusion. So in a way as an effort to include other smaller businesses, smaller organizations, because they are quite big. They've actually been having these regular sessions with various leaders and representatives in the communities. And I think it echoes what you're saying about the importance of listening and being either creating the environment which is safe enough for people to speak and to share ideas and to learn, or just being part of it and supporting it. So I think that's a really critical piece. Um, I just wanted to remind those that are watching once again, if you have questions for Chris, I think he's a very rich resource. If there's anything that you want to find out about, especially from the work that he's doing with Watson, please feel free to put that question in the comment section, and we will ask him during the course of this webinar. We just have one question actually that's just come in from Monica, and she's asking, in the tour that you did, in this listening tour that we've been talking about, did you find any sectors that are more open to entrepreneurs than others?
Oh, that's a terrific question. We found that the learning was that everybody is we don't know anyone that's used they don't tend to use the word entrepreneur, but they're all looking for internal innovation. It wasn't sector specific. And we attributed that to so much of the disruption that is currently happening. It's happening in most of our economies. It's happening through AI. We hear that a lot from our entry-level learners trying to get that first rung on the ladder, that everybody needs to be running a bit like a startup. And so it's not domain, sector, field, discipline specific.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Thanks, Chris. Monica, I hope you answered. And if you have a follow-up question, you can go ahead and ask that. So, Chris, I'm coming back to the community of practice piece because I think, especially on the issue of community and relationships and building those ties across industries and so on, I think it's really important. How does someone actually go about creating that kind of a space on a practical level? If someone is watching today, they have an interest in, as you called it, internal innovation. How do they find like-minded people within their organization, and how do they start implementing regular check-ins and so on? Do you have any tips on that?
Yes, and I appreciate you digging into this area because, as you said, it's so practical and you
Mm,
can get started immediately. I'll start by saying we all get really busy and we get focused on our jobs and we all have deadlines and families and other priorities. So it could be a challenging. A really simple way to start is just to write down who are the people that have shared interests with you inside and outside the organization. And it can be a very short list. They share interests in the kind of change that you hope to see. Think about them as potentially confidants. There's that group that we described. And then there's allies who are often inside the organization and they know of what you speak when you talk about that change. And then the actual getting together and cultivation takes the form of the culture that you're in. What
Mhm.
is the most convenient, inspiring way for you to get these ideas moving? Start with a small listening tour. Is somebody else interested in this topic as opposed to only bringing your interest in it? And then let it grow from there. They will likely have somebody else who has a similar interest and it will grow quite organically. That's how you can cultivate it internally. Externally, there are a lot of ways as well. This community of practice that Sharon and I are talking about is really finding folks who are in your discipline who can support the ideas that you have. And ways to cultivate that are professional associations. For example, in the foundation world, there's very specific professional associations, often membership driven, where you pay a small amount and you attend meetings in the evenings or breakout groups with committees. It can sound kind of stuffy, but it's wonderful because these are your people. These are folks who care deeply about the uniquely interesting things that you do. If it's in a more specific domain, maybe it's supply chain, maybe it's back-end data infrastructure. There's professional associations for all of these areas as well, and I would encourage you to find them. Sometimes they're online, and
Mhm.
they host meetings for non-members, and you can just sit in and listen to see if this is the kind of group that you want to engage. So it helps to have a community of practice, not just for the internal innovation, entrepreneurship, but also for your own professional development and growth. You get to see how other people came to your discipline, what they're loving about it, what's really hard, and maybe how you can go about working together.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Though, thanks, Chris. I think those are really practical takeaways, and I'm sure many of our listeners, viewers will be able to implement what you've been speaking about. Another question we have from Raul is, in what ways are the new students who will shape our future being prepared to develop an entrepreneurial mindset?
Oh, it's such a good question. And our learning over these last 3 years is that they're not.
Mm,
And I say that because of a great quote from one of our participants in our 3 year listening tour. And they said, students are being prepared for a world that doesn't exist. And what they meant by that is that students are often on a bit of a treadmill in a learning environment that really hasn't changed for 50 or 100 years, where they're treated as vessels to be filled with certain kinds of skills and knowledge that could be applied to the workforce. But the workforce has changed. And
mhm,
so we haven't seen the education environments change nearly as quickly.
mhm. Well, that's it's a little bit bleak, but I think that that's the reality that we're dealing with, and I think then it's incumbent on all of us to see how what our role can be in supporting that shift that needs to take place, whether we're in the education sector or not. I think we all do have an interest. Either we have young people around us, we are parents to young people, we're mentors, and so on. So I think there is a certain responsibility that everyone has around that. Um, okay, another question we have from Sana. For individuals aspiring to this path, which I assume is entrepreneurship, what combination of skills or mindsets, such as empathy, cross-sector collaboration, or systems thinking, do you believe leads to the most meaningful change?
Great. I think that there are a few. One of them is developing leadership skills. And by leadership, we all have a different definition. When I talk to college students, they think of the dean or the president and they go, "Oh my God, I don't want to be the dean or the president of my school, so I don't want to be a leader." And what we mean by a leader is somebody who is identifying challenges and opportunities and motivating them, often with others, to influence change. And when
Mhm.
you use that definition, we can all be that kind of a leader. And so I think leadership skills are really important. One really good lesson that I learned on my leadership journey was that people aren't afraid of change. They're afraid of loss. And I brought this up in a previous Ashoka session that if we were all to have some great success happen to us, we would love that change. Those who have families, that's a kind of change that we look forward to. But people are afraid of loss, and you have to really weigh what the losses are going to be when you introduce your new idea. And those losses could be in the form of very tangible business issues. If a product is going to be discontinued, how will that revenue be replaced? That's a very specific financial loss. It can also be something more qualitative in terms of competence. If somebody is used to doing things a certain way, even if it's not efficient, they're really good at it and they've been valued for it, they'll feel loss if their job is changed. And so I'm glad that the writer brought up the idea of empathy. You're empathizing with what's going to have to change about the organization in order for your idea to move forward. So that's one kind of very specific area that I put under leadership skills. And there are others I'm happy to dig more into if you like, Sharon.
Yes, please do. I think the skill building part is actually the most critical topic we've been dealing with in this week's module. So I think we'd really like to know what other skills you think are useful, things like storytelling and so on, and how, especially how to win over people that are difficult or people who are not supporting you, but they are critical to the success of your
Yes,
idea.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why it's so important to start with the confidants. If you jump to the people that are allies, or you jump to perhaps somebody in the organization that has real authority to implement those things, and your idea isn't ripe. I use that
Mhm.
word ripe, meaning it hasn't really developed and gone through its process. It could all backfire. So start small and start with the confidants. Other skills that are very specific are relationship management. So
Mhm.
much of what we do at Watson is building relationships. And that doesn't mean only talking to folks when you need something. It's really trying to understand what it is that is in their interest areas, how they want to grow and develop, and being there for them. And when you build this large ecosystem of relationships, you can pretty much go after all kinds of ideas, and your ideas will get a much better a much better review than if you were to go it alone. And you may end up killing many of your ideas from this relationship management, which could be a good thing because you don't want to take an idea too far if it's really not the right idea. So building relationships is really important. And again, I don't find it to be one of the key learning skills that most young people get in their discipline. You often get put on team projects, perhaps, often somebody that you may not have wanted to be because they want to see how you deal differently, but not actually shown how do you build relationships with this group? And the very first thing we teach about building a relationship is to recognize that you're entering into an unfamiliar community. And so if you're building a relationship with somebody that's in a different discipline or a different field, they're a different culture, they're a different community. And you want to learn some of their language. Just
Mhm.
like if you were to travel abroad, when you can speak a little bit of the language, even if you do it terribly, it ingratiates you to that. And it shows that you're with them. You're not there to just bring your ideas and transactionally walk away. So the relationship management is really important. I'll add again, to be very specific, a way to do this is because it's hard to build lots of big relationships. It uses a lot of time. and even if you're well-intentioned, it's simply a lot of capacity, is to come up with a time that you're going to reach out to folks, even folks that are not directly in your current work path. For me, it's Friday afternoons where I just reflect on the people that I'm thankful for, or who have been really, we share a lot of interests, and I just send them a very short note. And then I find they send me a short note, and something shows up on LinkedIn when I post something, and we're just keeping in relationship.
Mhm.
And it becomes very helpful, especially when you become, 10, 15, 20 years out. Many of those relationships will still be there, possibly in different forms, but
Mm.
very positively.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Those are really some great points there. And could you speak, before we move on, just can you speak to the issue of resilience? Because I think you spoke about the fear of loss. And I think there's also the fear of failure, and people just don't want, none of us likes to fail. It can be really scary. So, how do you bounce back from that? And how do you develop, yeah, just the skill and that resilience as an entrepreneur to hear no's, receive no's, but keep coming back from that?
Thank you. The best thing I can say about failure is a great quote that comfort and growth can't coexist. And
Mhm.
it's this idea that you have to become a little bit uncomfortable, which can feel like an approach to failure. Uh, but it is the requisite for growth. And I think if you reframe, to use that word, your perception about the work you're doing, and instead of saying, wow, if I go for this, it could really create a mess and blow back and fail, is to instead to say that for me to grow, for this organization to grow, for this civic initiative to grow, whatever it is, we're going to have to go through some discomfort. And the trick is to go through the discomfort at a rate that the organization or that individual can manage. And that's where starting small, for example, with confidants and testing your
Mm,
ideas before you try to unleash them at a large scale, is a way that you can learn as you go and start to feel that discomfort and get used to it, and even and recognize it, and then welcome it eventually, knowing that that's going to be a passageway for you.
mm. Okay, that's very useful. Thanks, Chris. We have one more question from Karen, and she wants to know, narrowing down on culture, in your opinion, what sort of performance review and compensation structures cultivate entrepreneurship or internal innovation?
Oh, that's a great one. If you don't mind, I'd love to start at the very front of that, because now we're talking about human resources. I really
Mm,
think we have to change how we recruit and hire, and spend as much time writing the person requirements as the job requirements. To get back to one of the earliest questions about students being trained for these things and who we're recruiting into these organizations, we often write job descriptions very specifically to the tasks, roles, and responsibilities. And we really have to spend more time on the person requirements. What is the kind of person that's going to thrive here? And have it include the kind of things that are essential to entrepreneurship: collaboration skills, relationship skills, all of these things, because the job that the person's starting at is not going to be the job that they're going to be doing in 2, 3, 4 years. So you need the right person who's going to be able to adapt to that. And it starts with how we recruit individuals. It can't just be for the job that's going to be done today. It needs to be that person and how they're going to be able to adapt. To the specific question around this, I think that it takes uh, having an organization, it does take having very specific structures. And so, for example, encouraging the organization to be entrepreneurial. So it takes the form of training, first of all, to say
mm,
that everybody is aware of what the business is about and where it's headed. Without that, it's very hard to be entrepreneurial because you're not sure what's going to be useful. So it takes understanding what it is the business is about and where it's headed. And then it requires training by the team. It means saying, look, this is what entrepreneurship looks like here. This is how you recognize good ideas. This is how you bring them forward. And having a very explicit system, as long as it remains implicit, people aren't quite sure and they're more nervous bringing their ideas forward. I've seen all kinds of specific KPIs in this where it could be somebody's genuinely compensated for new intellectual property like patents that are developed and issued and registered. So it can take that form, but it can also take the form of other forms of recognition that are quite humble, but really value the team. Because at the end of the day, that's often a big part of what is motivating a person to be working there is that they feel valued in their work. So it could be as simply as recognition for somebody who brought up an idea when nobody was looking. And that's really
Mm,
the requirement of a manager to say, we're all busy here, and so created this new way of thinking about something. It's that problem that all of us have been talking about for the last year, and she went and really thought through it. And then they're signaling that we want more of that. So
mm.
hopefully those are some of the small scale and some of the large scale ones. And I'm always happy to follow up with anybody on the Zoom today if they want to dig deeper.
Yeah. No, thank you, Chris. I think it's such an important topic, actually, the whole people dimension within organizations and how that plays a role in creating the culture. And I love what you said about job descriptions and people descriptions, but also giving people room to grow and room to adapt, because you find that most places they're looking for people who you're a finished product already. It's complete. You are the perfect person. But as you're saying, in 2 years, 4 years, where is there left to go? What is that person doing? What are they working on? Who have they become? So I think those are really important issues. I think we could actually have a whole webinar around just that alone, because it's such a game-changing piece within most corporations. But since we don't have all that time, I would like us to move on to the next question. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we've been working through different modules on the course. And so next week we're in module 5, and we'll be exploring the idea of shared value and collaboration across sectors. So from the work that you do, I know you have a lot of rich insights around that. So could you share some of them with us, especially on bringing together different partners and institutions to collaborate for social impact, and also how to collaborate across sectors and even across disciplines as well?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Would you mind if I share my screen?
Please go ahead.
I think this will be directly applicable.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, I can see it.
This is, I'm glad that you asked the question because we have been spending a lot of time together with Winterhouse Institute cultivating how you collaborate across your organization, across disciplines, and even across sectors. Because so often, if you're in an industry that might be regulated, for example, or requires policy change, you'll be operating across sectors, not only disciplines adjacent to yours. And what you're looking at on this screen is something that we've developed over about 15 years together with other international business, education, and social sector leaders. And it's currently used by in thousands of different projects. It's a very simple framework, and I'll go through it very quickly and then happy to answer any questions. But basically, on the left, it's composed of two parts. The left side is a how can we, and that is your entrepreneurial, your internal innovation idea. How can we, and fill in the blanks. It usually involves some motion, something that's going to change, and where that change will happen, and who is going to benefit from it. And you simply fill that in. And then on the right side are solutions to that. Rather than jumping to an immediate brainstorm, we encourage you to really understand that how can we and go deep into it before trying to come up with those solutions. And the right side shows you how to do that. It's composed on the right side. It's a simple chart. On the left is scale of vision. That's the scale of your idea. At the bottom, it could be measured in number of people you hope to impact. It might be the 4 people that are on your immediate team, and you want to increase morale, you want to increase productivity, you want to solve a challenge of a current product or service. But at the very top of the scale of vision might be thousands or millions if you're doing something that's of a very large systemic change. Down at the bottom is where you are. That's us. That's where we're starting. And so when I build this out, you're going to see what I mean. So first, think about the scale of your vision. Is it a project that only you are going to be working on? Or is it a system, which is usually a collection of projects that crosses disciplines and ideas? Or is it genuine culture change, where you're trying to impact how the organization is operating? And then the range of resources. Again, there we are at the bottom, the individual. It may simply be a project that's yours and you're going to bring that to fruition. It's a report about something you've learned and you want others to know about it. But as you go across the bottom, the range of resources, it may be an idea that crosses disciplines. You're, as an individual in your discipline and role, not able to bring it forward by yourself. You need others' expertise. And then, as I mentioned, cross-sector. And any solution that you come up with is going to fit into this gray box. And so we encourage you, after understanding the challenge, that the how can we, is to start populating this with solutions and think about, well, what is it that I want to do? Is it an individual thing that's just a project I want to try and pilot? Or is it something that's bigger, for example, that may be system-wide and cross-disciplinary? Or is it culture change that I'm going to need cross-sector buy-in? And of course, when you get to the upper right, it gets bigger and harder. And that's where the relationships get even more important. So I bring this pathways model up because you can use it to come up with any idea and then see what the scale of vision and range of resources are and how they're interacting with each other. The model, from what we've learned from others who've used it, has shown 2 really important things. The first is that you want to be very careful operating here. This is the area where you're an individual and you try to do the system change and the culture change by yourself. You have a very high vision, but you have very low resources. It's just you. That's the recipe for burnout. And it's the recipe for your idea to not make it through the required thresholds in order to survive and thrive. So too, a danger zone or a watch zone is the lower right. This is where you actually have all the resources in the world. Folks have said you know how to access all the folks in the other disciplines because you have wonderful relationships. And you even understand how to navigate some of the cross-sector areas. But your vision is very low. You're not trying to change the culture. You're working on something that's extremely small. That's also a dangerous place because you're asking people to come along with you. And if the vision is too small and the impact is not going to be large enough, it may be difficult to follow next time. And people will wonder, is my capacity best used in this current role? So I hope that that's been a helpful for understanding a little bit more about how to think about collaboration and how to bring your specific ideas to life. We call this pathways because often somebody will put their idea on here, and it's often down in the project individual me place. But because they're looking at this chart and they're thinking about how could the scale of the vision be bigger? What if I was to try to impact more people? It gets them thinking about a bigger vision and it becomes a true pathway. They do start at the project individual level and then they draw a pathway to other check marks over time and it becomes very strategic in that way. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Wow, that was really interesting. I think our learners are, yeah, they're learning a lot from it, and there are quite a lot of questions and comments around that, and just the fact that co-creation is key. So Erica and several others are wanting to know more about the cross-sector collaboration. And if you could share a bit more about how to build a culture of co-creation and how to convince people who are afraid of competition and who are hesitant to share knowledge.
Yes, I see the two as directly related, so I'm glad that you asked them. I think that in a culture that is very hierarchical, it's difficult to build a culture of co-creation. And I think you have to be very creative about it. Think about what is the DNA of the organization and think about what does the organization have to lose. This goes back to that idea that people aren't afraid of change, they're afraid of loss. Why are they afraid? And when you say it's competition, what are they afraid of? That if you are to succeed, then they wouldn't? You might try to see if you could test that assumption. Could it be that they're also looking to accomplish something in the organization or be an entrepreneur? And maybe there's a way of having a conversation to see that they could greatly benefit as well. So you're trying to find shared interests. And once you find those shared interests, they're no longer competitive. There are folks who are saying, yeah, I can see how this is valuable. That said, I would start with the confidants because that individual may look like an ally and they may not. You don't know until you find out. But starting with the confidants to try out your ideas in a safe way where they're really protecting you is the best way to test those ideas.
Mhm. Okay. And Chris, what would you say are some initial steps that our learners can take to not just understand more about social innovation, but also to begin to support social entrepreneurs and implement their own projects as entrepreneurs as well?
The best thing to do is to really do good research on the kind of social entrepreneurship that you want to do. There are a lot of organizations out there, each one segmented by interest areas. So, for
Mhm.
example, if your interest is in healthcare or if your interest is in uh, reproductive rights, it could be anything. There are organizations that have those focus areas. And so do the research to tap into those. In other words, a lot of these organizations exist and you don't have to. I remember when I was graduating, I wish I knew there was an Ashoka and I didn't. And there are other organizations out there that are looking for social entrepreneur ideas. The kind I'm referring to are typically something that you're starting outside of the organization. But I've been heartened that there are a lot of internal mechanisms in some organizations too. Sometimes it goes by the name of CSR, the corporate social
Mhm.
responsibility, where the organization is looking to engage the community social sector and staff in some interesting way. That could be a door in your organization to enter if you're trying to do something internally.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you, Chris. So I hope you don't mind me asking something on a personal level. I like to find out from some of our guest experts, what is it that drives them? Like, what's your personal why? Like, what inspires you when you wake up every day to do the work that you do?
Oh, thanks for asking. It's very specific, and that is that potential is very widely distributed, but the invitation to develop it is not. And I'm motivated every morning to make sure that people who have ideas or aren't even sure who they want to become realize that there are skills, environments, and relationships available to them so that they can, because it's important for them so that they thrive. And what we find most often happens is that when they thrive, they want others to thrive and they create wonderful things for all of us. That's my why.
Wow. That's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we are winding down very quickly. We're almost at the top of the hour. If you have any last questions for Chris, please put them in the chat, in the comment section just below. But Chris, would you have any final words of wisdom as a parting shot to our learners today?
The idea of change can be scary, and if it's not scary, it could just be daunting due to limited capacity. And so I wanted to start there and really acknowledge it and appreciate that a lot of folks who may be here today are feeling that. And by doing some of the things that Sharon and I have talked about today, and those who've asked questions have helped us all build together, you can really start moving some of these ideas forward. It's important to start small. It reduces the anxiety. I think if you try to go too far too fast, it can feel overwhelming and you can start to speculate all the things that may go wrong. And so I'm appreciating how it can be a challenge. Start small and use some of these skills to start moving your ideas forward. And think of it as a process and a journey that's going to help you develop as the ideas do as well. So, really, regardless of whether that one idea that you have that you wanted to bring to fruition happens or not, you've grown a tremendous amount along the way and you're ready for the next.
Wow. Thank you, Chris. So many great takeaways that have come from this webinar. If I was a learner who's watching, and in fact, even as the facilitator, I think it would be good to just go back and rewatch this video. Our time is running out, so unfortunately. So, Chris, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time from your very busy schedule to speak to us today.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks for everybody who joined.
Absolutely. Thanks indeed to everyone who's been able to watch this session live. I'm quite sure today's session has been as enlightening and inspiring for you as it has been for me. I think just hearing about how we as social entrepreneurs ourselves can also join in the mission to be bridges for people to move from who they are to who they could be. So thanks for joining us. And remember to join myself, Isa, and Andrea for the community session next week, which will be an open space for you all to speak to one another about what you're working on, the insights you've had, whether from these webinars, from the comment section, from the materials you've been reading in each module, and of course to also surface any challenges that you're having in your entrepreneurship journey. We'll also be exchanging tips for success based on the various experiences that have been shared on the platform. So lots to look forward to. And also, there's a very short but useful exercise that you will need to do next week as a brief assignment. So that's another thing that you can look forward to. But in the meantime, thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the weekend and goodbye for now.